Do you think of Jesus as a prophet? Maybe sometimes. We mainly think of him as a teacher of wonderful things and a man who did wonderful miracles. We say, what a wonderful world it would be if people all lived by the teachings of Jesus Christ. Even people who do not believe in him how we do say that. But Jesus was a prophet. He did prophesy future events. I want to consider a prophecy Jesus made not long before his death, the one known as the Mount Olivet prophecy. It's called that because it was given on the Mount of Olives, which is on the east side of Jerusalem. From there was a wonderful view across the valley of the temple on the other side. It almost shone in the sunshine with the light stone reflecting it. Disciples didn't often get to see it, as most of them came from up the north and Galilee. So it was a chance for them to see it, and they were amazed by the sight of it. Look at this temple, they said to Jesus. I want to go through Matthew chapter 24, so I'd be glad if you could turn that up, please, Matthew chapter 24, and we'll go through it verse by verse. And a bit later on, I'll be taking a few comments from the Gospel of Luke, where Luke adds a few details that Matthew doesn't give us. In chapter 24, verse 1, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came for him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left one stone upon another, that shall not be thrown down. But it's difficult for us to understand the power of what Jesus was saying, because you think of perhaps the bricks in this building, or the bricks in the building over the road. If it's built of stone, you think of pieces of stone like this. But the pieces of stone that the temple in Jerusalem was made, some of them were 70 tons each. And it's quite amazing how they ever got into position. And how on earth are they ever going to all be thrown down? So it's an amazing prophecy he made, actually. But it's not just Jesus who says this here, it says elsewhere in the Bible. We don't turn to it, but in Matthew chapter 29, he gives you a time period prophesying the death of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And it says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. That's the death of Jesus Christ. And the people of the prince, that's the Romans, shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary is the temple, and the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. So the prophet Daniel, several hundred years before Jesus Christ was born, prophesied that following on from the death of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, that his people, they're called his people because they're doing what he wants them to do, the Romans, would come and destroy the city. Also, we have the words of John the Baptist, who says, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Well, he doesn't spell out what wrath he's talking about, but it's the same wrath he's talking about. Because of their wickedness, of the people he was preaching to, the whole system in Israel was going to be overturned by the Romans. Also, this destruction of the city and the temple is referred to in the parables of Jesus. For example, in the parable of the wedding feast, in Matthew chapter 22, we read, And when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and sent forth his armies, and destroyed those murderers, and burnt up their city. So in the parable of the king's servants is mentioned. And in the parable of the tenants in the vineyard is mentioned, as Matthew 21, verse 38. And when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir, come let us kill him, and let us seize his inheritance. And they caught him and cast him out of the vineyard and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do to these husbandmen? And they say unto him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard to other husbandmen, which will render him fruits in their seasons. So it is surprising that God sent the Roman armies to come and destroy Jerusalem and the temple. And in the meantime, the gospel message went out to other people. That's what that's referring to in that parable. Let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen. That's the Gentiles who will now be called into the gospel. So even in the parables, it's talked about this future destruction of Jerusalem. But the disciples are shocked. And in going on in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, we now come on to verse 3. Disciples came unto him privately, saying this. They're asking him privately, away from the crowds, because they're very concerned about this. When will these things be? And what will be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Now, there's two questions here. When will these things be? That's a destruction of the city and the temple. And what will be the sign of Jesus Christ coming back to the earth and bringing about the end of the world? Now, these two questions are answered by Jesus now. And when he gives these answers, we have to decide which we think the two are referring to, because part of his answer is referring to the events leading up to AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed. And part of his answer is relating to what we believe is the time we're living in now, leading up to Christ's return to the earth. So these things described in this chapter are referring to those two periods of time, the time before AD 70 and the time before Jesus Christ coming back to the earth. And Jesus makes it quite clear. He says, for as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So there's absolutely no doubt about it when it happens. We won't be saying, well, I wonder if this is him or isn't it him. You'll know. Now, the prophecy of the destruction of the temple was fulfilled in AD 70, and here we are now in 2022. So this prophecy of Matthew 24 covers a period of 2,000 years then. Covers quite a long period. Now in Matthew chapter 24, verse 5, let's see what he goes on to say. He says, many shall come in my name, saying I am Christ, and shall deceive many. In other words, there will be false Christs. Well, there was Simon Bar Kokhba, who led a Jewish uprising in AD 135. In our day, there's the Sun Myung Moon, founder of the Unification Church, claiming to be Jesus Christ. And so many others we've not heard of. There have been lots of these false Christs. In verse 7, Jesus goes on to say, this is Matthew 24, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Well, we never hear the news without there's some problem between nations. We hear of the threat Iran is in the Middle East. We see Russia spreading its influence, trying to dominate the globe. And since I wrote these notes, we've had the Ukraine war break out. That wasn't happening when I wrote these notes. And we say, well, people say, well, we've always had famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. We've always had them. But I think what's different is that in our day, these things are a lot worse. Let's look at these things in detail. First, he talks about wars. In what way are wars worse today than they were? Well, we've always had the army and the navy. But in 1907, the United States Air Force was formed. So war moved into a new dimension, the air. Since then, we've had chemical warfare, cyber war, and in 2019, President Trump announced a new space force. Only in the 20th century have we, for the first time, had two world wars. We've never had world wars before. So, and another thing that's new today is terrorism. That's a brand new type of war that we've not had before. An enemy with no uniform, no flag, no national border that can pop up and attack anywhere at any time. And it's hard to spot them. It's a new type of war. Then Jesus mentions famines. What's new today about famines? Well, one thing that's new in our day is a huge population of 7.7 billion, last time I looked, all needing feeding. Also new is the threat of global warming. And there is talk that unless urgent action is taken, it will be too late to stop it having a momentum of its own. We only have 10 years to do something, we were told. We were told that a year or two ago. But nations are selfish. Wealthy nations don't want to pay the cost, and poor nations can't. With global warming, the sea level will rise, flooding coastal communities. And since I wrote these notes, we found that global warming is causing poor harvests, leading on to famine. So you see how one thing leads on to another. We find that the COVID pandemic has caused other things to go wrong, and they cause other things, and it just goes on and on like dominoes knocking each other over. Climate change has led to freak weather, huge storms and fires. It's led to famines in some places due to drought and floods in other places. It's caused the bleaching of coral reefs. Jesus also mentions pestilences. Well, we have to say that as soon as they find a cure for a disease, another one pops up. So they work very hard to find a antidote to the COVID, found a COVID vaccine, then up pops monkeypox. And so we go on and go on. The coronavirus is understood to have originated in a wet market in the Chinese city of Wuhan, with original host believed to be bats. And we've had a warning from some professors that if we carry on tampering with wildlife the way we do, this business of having pandemics is going to become more and more frequent. Going back to Matthew chapter 24, verse 7, the next thing Jesus mentions is earthquakes. In what way are earthquakes worse? Well, we now know that many earthquakes are caused by the movement of tectonic plates. That's pieces of the earth's crust that move about on the surface of the earth, and they rub up against one another sometimes. Where they rub up against one another, or one's going underneath another one, you get earthquakes. So these pieces of the earth's crust move slowly and collide, and earthquakes are often at the joins of two plates. Now, the reason earthquakes are worse is that because the Earth's population is bigger, and most people live on the joins of tectonic plates. And why do you think people live on the joins of tectonic plates? It's because that's where minerals are found. And where minerals are found, you can generate wealth. So where you get wealth, you get people. So as the population increases, earthquakes will get worse. We're carrying on through Matthew chapter 24, and we get now to verse 9. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Just look at the persecution there's been of believers in Jesus Christ. There is much recorded in the book of Acts in the Bible. But down the ages, the Catholic Church has persecuted Protestants who rejected the authority of the Pope. There was a Spanish Inquisition from 1478 to 1834, the massacre of Bartholomew of 1572. And look at these Persians who come to us from Iran, saying many of them have fled for fear of their life because they were liable to be put to death because they become converted to Christianity. So it's happening all over the place. Today, Boris Johnson has stated that he wants to defend persecuted Christians. Chapter 24, verse 14. Jesus says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Now, this is a remarkable verse. So one of the signs we've got of Jesus Christ coming back to the earth is that the gospel message will be preached into all the world. Now, some have said that this refers to the gospel being preached throughout the Roman Empire before the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Now, while this may be so, Jesus is also giving signs of his second coming. Well, only now is the gospel being translated into almost every language. By 2018, the full Bible had been translated into 683 languages, the New Testament into an additional 1,534. By the 1990s, the New Testament was available in more than 100 languages in Papua New Guinea alone. This is a sure sign that Christ's return is near. Matthew 24, verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop come not down to take anything of his house. Jesus is referring here to an Old Testament prophet of Daniel. But what does Daniel mean by the abomination of desolation? Well, first of all, let's see what the word abomination means. Well, abomination to Jews was a building to some other false religion. So Daniel prophesied there would be one on the wing of the temple, put there by the people who destroyed Herod's temple, which was the Romans. The Romans destroyed it, and Daniel is prophesying that an abomination is going to be put on that site. But before that, Daniel said the city and temple would be destroyed. And this has happened exactly as prophesied. But Luke adds a bit more in his account. And this is where we need to bring in a bit of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verse 20, because he gives a few extra bits of information. In Luke, Jesus says, when ye see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Well, you read that, and it doesn't strike you at first, but then you stop and think about it. If you're in the city of Jerusalem, and the city of Jerusalem encompassed with armies, how could you possibly flee? You stop and think about it. When you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies, then flee. Well, anyone reading that before the event happened would think, well, that's impossible. How can you? Well, let's look at our history books and see what actually happened. How do you flee an encompassed city? Well, Jesus knew there would be a chance, but he only knew that by God's power. God's power is the only way he could have known. Listen to what happened. The Romans besieged Jerusalem in October AD 66, led by Vespasian and his son Titus. In May 69, Nero committed suicide after the burning of Rome, and Vespasian, keen on perhaps being the next emperor, halted the siege and withdrew the men. This gave any Jews in Jerusalem a chance to flee. It's what we call a window of opportunity today. Those who ignored this warning of Jesus Christ and didn't flee the city perished, because needless to say, the Roman armies came back again to finish the job. Titus returned in force, and after a 5-month siege, the city was destroyed. And if you're interested, you can see a video on YouTube showing you in detail the way the Romans attacked, besieged, and took the city of Jerusalem. And there's a lot known about the way it was done. And it's very interesting, but it's grim watching. It's grim because you're watching the destruction of a city. Jesus made another prediction in Luke chapter 19. We needn't turn that one up. This is what Jesus says in Luke 19, speaking about Jerusalem. The day shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side. And they shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Well, let's look at those words. They shall cast a trench about thee and compass thee around. The word trench means a rampart or a mound. Now, during the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70, the Romans built a wall all the way round the city to stop any Jews escaping. Barnes's commentary tells us this. Titus, in order that he might compel the city to surrender by famine, built a wall around the whole circumference of the city. This wall was nearly 5 miles in length and was furnished with 13 castles or towers. This work was completed with incredible labor in 10 days. Now that was the fulfillment of the words of Jesus Christ in Luke 19. Thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee and compass thee around. And you could read those words and not even think particularly about them. And yet they're remarkable words. We go on back now to Matthew chapter 24, and we now come up to verse 21. He says, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. Now, during the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70, some mothers ate their own children. And it's all described by the Jewish historian Josephus, who was there at the time. Now, remembering that Jesus is also answering about his return to the earth, look at the tribulation today. Look at the number of refugees fleeing persecution all over the world today. We have these many Persians who've come to this country, and many of them have become Christadelphians. But they aren't the only ones. You've now got all these refugees from Ukraine, and you've got refugees from other countries. If I had a map of the world, I could show you all the different countries where people are fleeing from them for one reason or another. In fact, it's been said that there's never been a time like it in history for refugees. But no doubt, the words of Jesus Christ apply to the city of Jerusalem in AD 70, where very few of them survived. Jesus said, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. Now, that could apply very well to the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. But it also applies to the world today. That if Jesus Christ doesn't come back soon and stop the events that are going on in this world today, the very civilization that we enjoy is under threat and could collapse. Plastic pollution is getting into the stomachs of birds and fish, as a result of which, unless they can regurgitate it, they will starve. Microparticles of plastic are getting into our food, and they've been found at the bottom of the ocean, and they've been found up Everest. So there's nowhere you can get away from these microplastics. Birds have it in their organs. Doubt has been expressed over how long the earth will be habitable or whether civilization will collapse. Forests are being felled at an alarming rate. The ozone layer is depleted. The sea is warming, and there is a decrease in oxygen in the ocean in places. Therefore, there is a decrease in plankton, and there is acidification. Therefore, a decrease in the number of seabirds. The number of insects is decreasing, including the honeybee, which is necessary for our survival. Many animals are facing extinction. The 16-year-old Greta Thunberg and the 94-year-old Sir David Attenborough have been warning the world we only have so long to act. The coronavirus caused the global warming problem to be postponed. It also hampered the efforts to be rid of locust swarms in Africa and the efforts of people flooded out in the UK to get their properties put right. Going back to Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, Jesus prophesied an abomination on the temple site. When you see the abomination of desolation prophesied by the prophet Daniel. Right? So there's going to be a false worship set up on the temple site, he says. Well, the Romans offered a swine at the east gate of Jerusalem in AD 70. Well, that's just a foretaste of what was coming. The first long-lasting abomination was a Roman pagan temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, built in AD 135, and then the pagan sanctuary of Venus, also in Jerusalem, in AD 135. The next was a Christian basilica built by Constantine over the supposed tomb of Christ, built in AD 325 and destroyed in 614. But the enduring one, and the one we all know, was when Omar built his wooden dome of the rock deliberately on the temple site in Jerusalem. And he built, the best date we can come up with this is 657. Later replaced by a stone building in about 690. Now that abomination is still there, and it's very well known to us in our present day with its golden dome. Now, if we could turn to Luke for a moment, Luke adds extra information about what will happen after the fall of Jerusalem. In Luke chapter 21, verse 24, it says, "They, the Jews, shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive unto all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of Gentiles be fulfilled." Jews were sold as slaves throughout the Roman Empire, and many died from want because there was a glut of slaves, and they did not all find buyers. Later, they went into all the world, and it was hard to find a country with no Jews living there. And it is today. Very hard to find a country with no Jews there. So that fulfilled the prophecy of Jesus Christ. The Jews would be led away captive into all nations. Wonderfully fulfilled. Jews were disliked, and there was universal anti-Semitism, and they had to flee from country to country. They had to live by their wits to survive, and became traders and helped each other with everything from getting employment to getting a wife. Jews had to marry Jews. In many countries, Jews were treated like animals. They had to pay a toll to go over a bridge like a donkey. They couldn't send their children to the same schools as other children. In many cities, they had to live in a Jewish quarter called a pale or a ghetto. We get references to the Jewish pale or going beyond the pale, which all comes, these expressions all come from these Jewish quarters within cities. There were many massacres of Jews. Some were baptized as Christians by force. Jesus said that this would be until the times of Gentiles be fulfilled. Well, what does this refer to when the times of Gentiles were fulfilled? About the time of the French Revolution, the tide turned. Jews were emancipated country by country to the level of other nationalities. France in 1791, Prussia in 1812, Britain in 1858, and 1871, Germany. But Bible scholars knew that the fall of the Turkish Empire was needed before Israel could turn to their homeland in the land of Israel. In 1897, we had the first Zionist Congress established by Theodor Herzl with the object of establishing a Palestine as a national home for the Jews. Then in 1917 came the British Declaration the Balfour Declaration by Prime Minister Balfour. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Then in the Second World War, Hitler tried to destroy all Jews, moving them on trains in huge numbers to prison camps, where they were killed in gas chambers and burnt in ovens. He managed to kill 6 million or so before his death. In 1848, the Jewish state was established by the newly formed United Nations. Jews began returning in huge numbers to Israel from all over the world. just as prophesied in the Bible. In 1967, in the Six-Day War, Israel took the old city of Jerusalem, except the temple site. In 1992 began the unsuccessful peace process, which only in very recent years has started bearing fruit under what we know as the Abraham Accords. Jews returned to Israel in such as Operation Magic Carpet and Operation Moses. A few countries moved their embassies to Jerusalem. As we speak, there are still 100 countries in the world with 100 or more Jews in, and the number of Jews in Israel has just overtaken the number of Jews in America. Oh, and since I wrote these notes, I found out that the number of Jews in Israel is now more than the number of Jews in the rest of the world added up. For the first time since the Jews were scattered in the first place in AD 70. The first time since then that's been the case. Jesus said Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Let's just think of that phrase, trodden down of the Gentiles. I'm going to give you a potted history of Jerusalem over the last 1900 years. Jerusalem was occupied by the Romans, then the Persians briefly, then the Arabs, then the Turks, then the Egyptians, then the Crusaders, then the Egyptians again, then the Turks, then Britain. We had to go from 1917 to 1947. And then Israel formed a state in 1948, but only occupied the old city of Jerusalem in 1967. Jesus said Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles, and it certainly has. Just look at that list. And I well remember when I first went through my history books, finding all this out, I was overwhelmed by how many different countries have occupied Jerusalem over the last 2,000 years. Absolutely overwhelmed by it. But when were the times of Gentiles fulfilled? Can we put a date on that? Some would say it was fulfilled in 1967 when the old city was conquered by Israel in the Six-Day War. But still Muslims have jurisdiction over the Temple Mount. But going back to Matthew's Gospel, Matthew adds in verse 32, "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, then ye know the summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." Parable of the fig tree. What does Jesus mean by the fig tree? Well, the fig tree was the favorite of all trees in Israel. But let the Bible be its own expositor. Where else is the fig tree mentioned in the Bible? Where is the previous reference of the fig tree in the Bible before the one where Jesus refers to it here? Why? It's in Matthew chapter 21. When Jesus saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon but leaves only, and said unto it, "Let no fruit grow on thee henceforth forever." And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How soon is the fig tree withered away?" Here was a living parable of Israel. The fig tree represented Israel, and Jesus was prophesying the destruction of the nation of Israel, withering away. So the fig tree, clearly, in this parable, is talking about the rebirth of the nation of Israel. When you see the fig tree sending forth its leaves, then you know summer's nigh. When you see the nation of Israel bringing forth leaves in the land of Israel, then you will know that the return of Jesus Christ is near. But you notice something about that parable, and that is, he says, leaves. When you see bringing forth leaves, he doesn't mention fruit. Now, with the Bible, you have to watch every word. Watch it what it doesn't say as well as what it says. Leaves and no fruit. A fruit in the Bible represents spiritual things. Fruit to God is what it usually, if you look at the parables, it talks about bringing forth fruit in the parables. It's always talking about bringing things to God. So there's Israel, largely in unbelief. Yes, they've gone back to the land. They've got their nation of Israel, but they're still very largely in unbelief. So leaves and no fruit. What a wonderful fulfillment. Now, returning to the Gospel of Luke, he says, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now, this is symbolical language. When he talks about the sun and the moon, it means the government, the people ruling over the nations. And the stars, these are the people who rule. The Bible uses symbolical language like this. So we're using this kind of language. An earthquake would be a revolution or a coup. And an eclipse would be a government losing its power. Do you understand how the symbology works then now? And he says, men's hearts will fail them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. In other words, governments overthrown, governments losing their power. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He shall send forth his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. That's the time when we're all looking forward to, when Jesus Christ will come back to the earth. The day of judgment will take place, and he will gather all those who believed in him, together to him. And that's going to happen then, when the world is in this terrible state. But then Jesus warns us in Luke 21, verse 28, and when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Begin. Well, they seem to be more than beginning to me. They seem to be well underway. And you just wonder how bad God will allow the situation to get before he sends Jesus Christ to intervene. Because clearly that is the only thing that will save man from his own folly. Jesus will return, gather his saints to judgment. Christ will redeem us from these horrors. Luke then gives a final warning, and this is the warning I want to leave you with. Take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, so that that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come upon all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Most people in this world are oblivious to the fact that Jesus Christ is about to return. Totally oblivious to it. When it happens, it'll come as a snare on them. Don't let it come as a snare on you. Making sure you're ready, making sure you don't get involved with the things of this world, or the pleasures of this world, leading you away from the things of God. And what a description this is of our age. People absorbed in pleasure and forgetting God. Watch you therefore, he says, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape these things and stand before the Son of Man. Are we ready to meet our Lord? Have we taken on his name in baptism? Is our lifestyle what he expects of us? If not, then we don't know how long we've got.